in a hurry. All right, Pastor Steve, last week we talked about a lot about liberties, did some things on basically not stumbling people, but that opens up. I got some questions here that I don't know, things that what can you do type of things, but they're specific that people have questions for. So
Right.
I'm going to start with, is it wrong to listen to secular music or non-Christian music since music is a form of worship? Now, we use that as an example, but didn't go into it as far as, is it wrong to listen to anything but Christian music? Can you just talk about that?
Well, I don't think it's necessarily wrong to listen to stuff that's not Christian. It's it's one of those things where the things that we do as believers need to be glorifying the Lord, and so a lot of the struggles that we have as believers come because of the whole principle of garbage in, garbage out. And there's a lot of stuff in secular music that's just nothing but garbage. And so a lot of times people pick on rock music or rap, and I do too. I pick on rap specifically. If you're listening to non-believing, non-Christian rap, for the most part, that stuff is talking about having sex with ladies, and that's not what they call it. And it's talking about treating women like they're objects, and that's not what they call it. And it's a totally ungodly attitude towards women and towards the male-female relationship, and it's stuff that is just flat out wrong. And so you're listening to that stuff, I can tell you flat out it is not pleasing to God, and it is sin to do that. And so there are some things in our culture nowadays that it's not even a question of whether or not it's a liberty. If you're doing it, it's just flat out sin. And it's not like when I was a kid, when you had a choice between listening to Keith Green or listening to James Taylor or something.
I have no idea who either of those two are.
Yeah. And so it's not a question of nice love songs versus stuff that is worship music, basically. Yeah, it's not even that issue anymore. It's just flat out sin versus things that are glorifying to the Lord. But then on the other hand, it's like God is somebody who cares about marriage and that kind of thing, and so I don't have I've played love songs for my wife on my guitar, and so it's because I love it. And they don't have to be Christian love songs, as long as they're not something that's defiling the relationship or that kind of thing. And so, in everything that I do, I need to be glorifying the Lord. And so, I used to play football. Football is not in the Bible, and I drive a car. Driving cars is not in the Bible, But when I was playing ball, I needed to glorify the Lord in the way that I did it. And the same thing with driving my car. That's a little harder, at times, because when people cut you off, it's like you're praying for them, but you're praying God reward them according to their works.
Yeah.
Instead of praying for grace, and that kind of thing. And I'm joking around about that, but music is a big deal. So I was saying people pick on rock music and people pick on rap and that kind of stuff, but country and Western music is some of the raunchiest stuff I've ever heard. I grew up with it, and my parents lived by it, and my childhood was a wreck because they lived by every principle and every attitude that you found in country music at the time. And so garbage in, garbage out. What you're listening to all the time is going to be something that affects you. And there are people who are going to be listening to me right now and saying, "Oh, that's nonsense," and you have no idea until you stop listening to it.
Yeah, it's true.
And then you come back and hear a song, 2 years later, and you're like, "Oh my goodness, what in the world was I thinking?"
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you
No,
off.
go ahead.
So one thing I like that you say is that I've heard you say before is that the reason country music is worse than all of them is because you can actually understand what they're saying. Whereas in some rap and rock, they're singing so loud wherever you don't even actually understand the words.
Right. Yeah.
But I remember that is when I first became a Christian, because I grew up on country music. My parents and like Garth Brooks songs, famous country
Who's
artist.
that?
Yeah,
No, I'm just joking.
but it was amazing when I cut that out and then go back and actually sing or listen to the songs that he's singing about adultery and affairs and all the stuff that I always thought the beat was awesome, but when you're like, I can't believe I was listening and singing to this,
Right.
you realize the transition there.
Yeah.
And some of those country singers, they claim to be Christian and they'll sing about Jesus and something in certain songs, but then they'll revert and go back to something that's totally unbiblical, and you're mixing those two. You don't understand those influences until you cut that out, and you're like, whoa, when you come back to it.
Right. It's exactly the same thing as hanging out with somebody who's constantly talking about, how he's sleeping around on his wife.
Mm-hmm.
You have that kind of influence in your life, and it's gonna jade you towards the right relationship that God has for you and your wife. And again, you don't want to be in a situation where you're being unequally yoked with unbelievers. I can't believe how many people get their counseling from songs or from artists, celebrities. It's like these people can't even run their own lives. What in the world do they have to say about mine? And you need to have no doubt about it. When they're writing a song, they're trying to tell you how to live. And again, it's one of those things where I pay attention to the things that I'm listening to, because I have enough problems with myself. I don't need to take on somebody else's dumb philosophy about how my marriage is supposed to go, and put that to music so it rattles around in my head all day. And that again is the deal with it. So garbage in, garbage out,
right.
and that's what you're going to get. And it's why God talks about not having those kinds of influences. 1 Corinthians 15:33 says, bad companions corrupt good morals. And that's the principle. You have things that are coming from people and they rattle around in your heads. So is that good?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.